Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and it is not Monday today. It is an extra special episode. Given this week's events, I saw some followers were saying, Scott, we need a new episode. There's so much news breaking, and we need your highly respected, high IQ takes. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to give the fans what they want. I'm going to give them another episode this week. So I hope you guys are pleased. This may mean I don't have an episode for Monday. I'm going to see what news events there are. There are so many news events to cover, so I still may have an episode Monday. I try to keep them on Monday. People don't like their Mondays. They like to get, a boost from Scott M. Greer through Highly Respected, so I like to keep it that way, but there's just so many news topics, especially stuff that I didn't get to cover on Monday or just happened since Monday, so I have to talk about it. And of course, the number one subject to talk about is, of course, Simone Biles. Now, you may say, oh, Scott, this isn't that important. Why are we talking about the Olympics? Just turn off your TV and ignore it. And yeah, I'm not watching the Olympics, and of course, we can just ignore it. But these are important cultural events that matter in our society. And it's important to discuss Simone Biles, especially since we're told that we must worship her and think of her as a hero for quitting at her team event. When the Olympics started, we were told that Simone Biles is the greatest gymnast of all time, which may be true, but this is stated as an objective fact in every article, which is a little odd because even with players who are objectively the best in their field, such as Tom Brady or Michael Jordan, there is New York Times isn't just going to say, this is the greatest basketball player ever. This is the greatest football player ever. They will hedge their bets. They may say this is the winningest quarterback of all time. Something that is objectively true. But here they're just saying, this is the greatest gymnast to have ever lived, Simone Biles, and you're like, that's something that's not even given to other terrific athletes. So you're already getting told to this worship, and then there's all this talk about black girl magic. There was a New York Times article about how, all these black women are the superior athletes in the world, and they have to demonstrate their magic, but the world doesn't support them. They talked about Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, who Naomi Osaka is funny is that she's half Asian, half Japanese, and she was raised pretty much all her life in America. Yet she represents Japan, and what's going on there? There's a lot of other interesting athletes who are only half Japanese who were raised in other parts of the world. Most of their non-white athletes are like this, and they were raised in another part of the world, and they go to Japan, which... even if you have American athletes doing this does expose the fact that, these people are ultimately going to be loyal to the stronger identity they have, and it's rarely American. Anyway, that's a digression. So with Simone Biles, that we have this thing that our whole, Olympic future depends on Simone Biles to perform. And then she doesn't perform well in her events, and then, she decides to drop out. Now, when she dropped out, she just said, people are like, oh, is it a medical issue? And that was initially reported. Then it turned out she said, no, it's not a medical issue. I just need time to take care of my mental health. And when people heard this, immediately that made her more of a hero. By quitting, she turned it into a victory. And pretty much all the media coverage was saying about how she's the real winner. She's the real GOAT, greatest of all time. In case of those listeners who may not know what GOAT means, I'll get more into that statement in a bit. This is all reinforced by her quitting. And you're like, okay. Now, when you first hear the mental health... Now, I want to say this about Simone Biles. Now, some of the people who are defending her are probably correct that this isn't simply just her feeling too much stress or pressure, is that this is it is probably something that would be classified as a medical problem. She's on ADHD medication, which the Olympics has banned as a performance-enhancing drug, and apparently it's a performance-enhancing drug for Simone Biles, and it's likely causing her to have withdrawals, which is messing up her head and hurting her performance. That's probably the likely scenario, and there's something called aerial disorientation that she's happening that, it could lead to an injury. I think if that had been the case, is saying, she's having serious problems that are affecting her ability to perform. That's not just simply like, oh, I'm feeling depressed or stressed or I'm depressed or whatever. There's just too much pressure right now. That probably been more explainable, but that does go into this notion, this idea that America is just so much filled with mental illness that even to perform at what their job is, they need these medication. And it's like, why do you have, we're overprescribing ADHD medication. This was even a problem when I was a kid in the 90s. That there's too many kids taking Ritalin and stuff, and it's like being abused by all these kids just to keep them calm down. And now we see this even going forward in our Olympic athletes, that they have to take this medication and even just to perform their jobs. But they clearly didn't want to say that, because they didn't want to say the greatest gymnast in the world depends on what the Olympics considers a performance enhancing drug. So they instead just said, oh, she's having mental health issues. She needs to take some self-care days. And that, of course, led to the arguments that, like, this is just a quitter. This is somebody who's caving under pressure. And that's the message that's sent to America, is that if you're feeling stress or too much pressure, just quit. Just withdraw and take some self-care days. That's what's important. And it further reinforces this mental health meme in America, that we all have to pretend that we have these various mental illnesses. Some of them brought on by life in America, granted. I'm not saying that it's totally made up, but our society encourages people to be mentally ill and to celebrate their mental illness, and then quit and not persevere in the face of life's ordinary struggles just because you're feeling blue or feeling stressed. I pointed this out on Twitter. If this was a male athlete making these excuses or reasons for why they had to quit, everyone would be roasting them. And I made the point about Tom Brady, but people really don't like Tom Brady because he's obviously a good-looking white guy who's very confident, and he has an arrogant, cocky side, and he always wins, and people hate that. So let's go to the nice black athletes like Patrick Mahomes or Steph Curry. If those athletes said, oh, you know what, I'm feeling stressed today, I can't play in the AFC Championship game, everyone would make fun of them. They would be like, I can't believe that Mahomes is setting this standard for quitting. And even though Mahomes did have if I recall correctly, some type of mental health, like, I need the pressure got to me moment, I think, after the Super Bowl, people still were more critical of him. It's not just I don't want to say it's not necessarily a white thing, even though if it was a white male athlete, they would certainly hate it. But it is a male thing that they would certainly, and a media perception of this person that makes it, makes it acceptable, that you all have to celebrate it. I can see maybe a basketball player doing this, in the next 2 years, saying, I can't play this game, I'm feeling too much pressure. But everyone would hate them. And also that team would hate him too, because they would be like, you're letting down the team. And men are much more knowledgeable about the team effort than themselves, I think, in that scenario, because men, are wired to, if they abandon the team or they abandon the tribe, it's like, the tribe is gonna retaliate against you. There's gonna be some serious punishment. They're wired for this. You can't betray your group. You can't betray the tribe. And then if you're letting down the team in the moment of need, they're always gonna say, oh, you need that self-help day. But mistaken. But Simone Biles is so beloved by the media and by our cultural institutions that no matter what she does, everyone's going to think it's great. So the one part that I've been talking about out of the first is this does encourage this America's obsession with mental health and mental illness to a point of just sheer absurdity. Most people I think if most people don't really have serious mental illness, it's just that they live in a society where mental illness is rewarded and encouraged. And thus people just say, oh, I'm feeling kind of sad today, I must have serious depression, I need medication for that. And we over medicate for everything. We don't let people, live their lives. It's like anything that may, and people just take, and especially women are incredibly over medicated for any mental illness they have. 1 in 4 American women report that they have mental illness, and this is much higher among younger women. Over 20% of white women in America take antidepressants. So this is not even just the medication talking about stuff for ADD or ADHD or for anxiety. This is just stuff for that is talking about depression, and that number is going to continue to rise, especially with this now. The worship around Simone Biles is they're going to just encourage everyone to be, say they have a mental illness and they need help. And any time, and it's very high among journalists, among the people who set the tone in our, social and cultural discourse. Anytime that there's like somebody's like, oh, I'm struggling with depression, or the worst is when somebody like a famous actor like kills himself, like Anthony Bourdain, or when there was Robin Williams, all these journalists come out as like, I've struggled with mental health too, and it's a little too much like, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. I understand. I think both Robin Williams and Anthony Bourdain had serious mental health issues, but I don't think that the people trying to turn this into an issue about themselves really do it. We're in a society that rewards mental illness and like tells people to say they're mentally ill. And now through Simone Biles, we now have a precedent set for people just to not do their responsibilities and their obligations because they're too mentally ill, and where they deserve like the sign of heroism. They deserve to be called heroes just for sitting out. So that's the one thing to keep in mind. And then the other thing is the obvious, is very obvious that this is a part of the imposed black worship that's foisted upon our society. Is that, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, before the Olympics started, they kept talking about black girl magic, and it's like, this is so great that like black women are the greatest athletes ever, and we're saying that all these people are just going to do fantastic. Naomi Osaka just got eliminated from one of her competitions this week's in tennis. Not black girl magic didn't work there. The Americans basketball team, which I'm pretty sure is now all black after Kevin Love left, even though I may be mistaken. He may have been replaced by a white player. They're not doing very well. And Simone Biles is not doing well either in her thing. But this is all just more encouragement to worship them, even in their failures. And this is what happened with the English soccer players. Those three black players missing their penalty kicks, they were then turned into the heroes of the nation. They're the three lions, the famous three lions of the English symbol. Those are those guys, and even though they failed to do what they're supposed to, they're actually won. And there was even articles saying they actually won by losing. And this is now what's happening with Simone Biles, is that she's winning by losing, and that she's the real GOAT by not showing up and doing her job. And this mentality is so pervasive that you can't even there's no way of it's very hard to resist it, as everywhere you turn that there is this constant message being blared out that you have to worship, that Magic Americans are much better than you. They are the superior race, and anything that they do is actually there comes with, even if it may seem wrong to you, there's actually an excuse or justification for their behavior, and then that makes them more worthy of worship. And with this cult of Simone Biles is and no matter what happens with her case, is even if she comes back and competes in the individuals, the worst scenario is that she comes back and competes in the individuals, and then she wins the gold, and then the media bonanza is going to be too much to bear. I may just log off Twitter because I'm just not going to be able to handle it. I'm going to have to take a self-care day for that. And that's what's the narrative they want to build up. And even if she doesn't medal, she's still going to be told, we're still going to be demanded to worship her and see her as an icon of America. And this is why I want to reiterate my point about why you shouldn't root for Team USA, is because what Simone Biles represents is our mental health obsession, our mental illness obsession, and spreading that all throughout the world, and this cult of magic. This is not what we want to support. Is by them having victories, imposes this insane notions upon the rest of the population. If they win gold, then you're taught, oh, you need to just quit. You can just have as many time off as you want to deal with your fake mental health problem, and it's not or. And you need to see these black athletes as the exemplars of America. And that's why you need to support Black Lives Matter and support reparations and fight against systemic racism by imposing critical race theory in our school system. This is the message being sent. And that's why, I mean, this is one of the things is that people need to not, one of the worst defenses of Simone Biles, and this is made by so many conservatives and a couple of libs, is that you can't do her backflips, thus you have no right to criticize her. And this is like, and this sometimes comes up in sports journalism a lot. It's like, yeah, you can't, you don't have the ability of these people. That is correct, but that's not the that's not a reason not to say criticize, because these people are supposed to be better than you. They're supposed to be representing the nation. They're supposed to be people you're looking up to. So of course they're not some average Joe Schmo who can't do backflips or can't do a cartwheel. That's not the point. And anytime they're saying, unless you are as good as her, you have no right to criticize her. It's like, where are your gold medals? Okay, well, where are your Super Bowl rings? Yet you still criticize Tom Brady. And that's the same with every other athlete. And this same argument can be made to politicians, where it's like, oh, you've never won an election before. How can you criticize him? This is an argument that the elites love, and it's like, it's an extension of the credentialism that we have, where it's like saying like, and it's where all these experts come out and tell us and keep telling us different things about the vaccine, and coronavirus, which we'll get to later on in the podcast. You know, they want to say, I have this degree from Harvard. Can you do you think you can criticize me and you don't have that degree from Harvard? And this is a part of that same credentialism, but this is not applied in every scenario. Of course, if you had people on ESPN saying you can't criticize Tom Brady unless you won a Super Bowl, that'd be telling their whole fan base that everyone who's watching ESPN that they cannot have an opinion on Tom Brady or any other major athlete. So what's the point of sports commentary? Very few people have won a Super Bowl. And it's the same with very few people won Olympic gold medals. And so the people making this argument a lot of them are horrible liberals who have no athleticism at all. I saw this graph made by this a real soy boy guy who was it's like, have you won 4 gold medals? No, you're a conservative pundit who can't do a cartwheel. And it's like a chart, and then it goes down, and it's like, unless you're Simone Biles, who's the greatest of all time, you can't criticize her. And then it all leads down to shut the fuck up. That's so because libtards love to curse as a way of showing how badass they are. But the conservatives are saying this. It's every conservative who says you can't criticize her unless you're doing this is a way of just saying I'm an athlete too. I work out and I know what athletes are like. It's them criticizing the critics is them asserting their once again another sign of their performative masculinity. It's like, you know what, when I'm around having my bourbon, having my cigar, I love to watch women's gymnastics at the Olympics, and I love cheering on Simone Biles because she's America. And that's what some people like Mitt Romney and Bill Kristol are doing. And it's like, no, I don't want to see I don't see the real America in Simone Biles, and you're not going to force me to say that. And also, that's because you can't perform the job. You can't notice the negative message sent by a person who's representing our country, the negative message sent by their actions. So, that's always a stupid argument. People, you can do this about anything. I should actually, anyone who criticizes my podcast, I'm actually going to start saying, look, I want to see you have, hosted talk for an hour and a half just by yourself. If you can't do that, you have no right to criticize my podcast. I want to see you shit post on Twitter. I don't think you can, so you can't criticize me. I'm going to start using that against my critics. Unless they're award-winning journalists and an Amazon best-selling author, they can't criticize me. You could even say I'm the GOAT of podcasting, I would like to say. But going on, I actually said it earlier that I would talk about the GOAT. The idea. I actually really hate this term because it is one of the defining phrases of sports symptom. As symptom, not symptom. Just want to point that out. This is anytime you see like a fat dude and like an oversized jersey and cargo shorts, they're always talking about the goat, the goat. It's like it's a pretty recent phrase. I don't remember this being around when I was really into sports in like the early 2000s. And it's like it's so defining. It's like the way that like ESPN like programs people's heads, and then like, and once they hear that phrase, then they'll just like worship. So it's not only do you have these like faux masculine conservative types who really, in their defense of Simone Biles, it's more about them talking about how they're like a peak athlete because they work out a few days a week. It is about also the same. On the flip side, you also have the ordinary ESPN viewer who, 20 years ago, that would have been a person who was pretty masculine, probably pretty conservative, just like a stereotypical male. But now, that person is a stereotypical male, but they're much more pathetic because they're taking in all the propaganda. So these are people who will, like white guys who will believe that Black Lives Matter, and they're happy that the NFL declares itself gay. This is like now the new sports fan. And these people, of course, I can only imagine the ESPN propaganda going on about Simone Biles, and they'll probably, bro, I love Simone Biles, she's the goat, and these dorks who can't do a backflip, those guys suck. And I can only imagine like when ESPN is commentating on this, like if you ever watch like ESPN commentating, it is like this, like, oh, there goes the ball, they're going crazy, their voices they have for this games is able to put a masculine facade over this terrible ideology that is actually really emasculating and really really lame. And I think that's gobbled up by all these sports fans. If you just call something the GOAT, even if it's like that like triggers their pea brains to go into supporting something. So once again, I think this story does prove how sports simps. I am every day I wake up, I'm like, I am constantly vindicated by my contempt for sports simps, and it's just further justified. It's just further reinforced by these new events, and I can guarantee you that the reason why the people are accepting this, cult of magic is because of the sports simp virus. So you can enjoy sports, of course. But you gotta avoid becoming a sports simp, and the easiest way to avoid that is to not watch ESPN. So I've got one more comment about this. I've been talking about the cult of magic of how America's national religion now is worshiping blacks. That's just, I mean, you look at the sacred reference we have for George Floyd statues, and the way we talk about black women and girl magic, and just even black movies, and just the way that people ooh and ah, and it's like they get on their knees and just like pray to black people to save them. It is, it's not the most original take. Even though the people who usually say there's like wokeness, that's like, well, who are they worshiping? And they won't say who they worship, but it's our magic Americans that they're worshiping. This is going global, and a lot of the taboos and sacred rules of our national religion now go to countries that don't even have many black people. So in Germany, there's this big controversy. The Greens party candidate for chancellor, it's their leader. She got caught saying the N-word, not in a derogatory way, and it was very much in a similar way that the New York Times COVID reporter who was fired earlier this year for repeating the word to students he was mentoring on a trip. It's very much in the same way. She was telling the story to the Council of Jews in Berlin, and they were talking, and she's recounting some story about racism, and she said that some friend's child, or I think even a teacher or student, whichever one, was having to write an assignment and would have to write out the N-word. And when she was recounting the story, she said the N-word, and in most of the German coverage, it's like "in Wort." It's just like really funny that they use the same. It's like "in Wort," in Germany. And she said this, and it was like in a private conversation. It may have been recorded, and she had to make this whole apology about saying it. Now, yes, this is a major public figure, but this does show that, like, even in the context of just like simply saying the word and telling a story, and you're actually criticizing the use of the word, even that way is like constantly demonized and requires you to like lose your job. Now, one difference between Germany and America is that she doesn't have to drop out for saying that word, even though we had plenty of video clips of Joe Biden in the 80s and 90s repeating the word in Senate testimony because he was just talking about like racist and he would say the N word. You know, she didn't have to drop out. But if there was a story today about a politician saying the N word and they had it on clip, you know, if it was a white politician, that person would have to drop out and resign. And this person may very well be the next chancellor of Germany. The Greens are overtaking the Socialist Party as like the leading left of center party against the Christian Democrats, who are the center right. That's Angela Merkel's party. And they're really terrible. They're arguably far worse than the Socialist Party. They're far more committed to the globalist American empire than the German socialists. German socialists also have friendlier relations with Russia, while the German Greens want to have even more so than the Christian Democrats, want to have a hostile relationship with Russia, and they want a greater alliance with the globalist American empire. Joe Biden might prefer the Greens to win. And so this just shows the taboo. And even in Germany only has only 1%, roughly 1% of the population is black. And yet they even have to dance around those taboos where it's not even like saying in using it in a derogatory way or derisive way to a certain people. It's just merely saying the word itself is a violation of all our rules and decorum, and it must require atonement. It's very religious aura around the term. And even, I'll talk about this in my next story, is that this is only about whites. There is disagreement about whether Hispanics can say it, because there's always every year there's a controversy over whether this Hispanic rapper should be allowed to say the N-word, but there is greater leeway given to Hispanics and other non-whites, even though with Asians I think it would they're not given the same leeway as the other people of color. It does show that there is so much taboo around it, that it's a global phenomenon now. And really, probably the only safe places to say it is the non-Western world and Russia and Ukraine. That's it. It's and even not even once again, not even say it in a derogatory way, but just simply recall you're reading a story and just saying it out loud. Even just seeing the word spelled out or just saying it is, you're invoking a demon. And the only way you can overcome this is just to drop to your knees and pray for forgiveness. And this is indicates the national religion we have. And it's not even just a national religion, it's an international religion that's extending to Western Europe. And we're trying to infect Eastern Europe as well with it, and Latin America, but I don't think it's going to work. So that's a funny story from Germany, but we're probably going to see more stories like that in the future. So that last thing I talked about is a good segue to our next topic, which of course is the January 6th Select Committee, which we had a whole show trial this week where, we had 4 officers come up there and they were recounting these horror stories, and everyone was crying and sobbing over the most horrific event to ever happen in America's history, which is January 6th. And this is further reinforcing the propaganda that they've given to us ever since January 6th happened, which, we're supposed to think that this is worse than 9/11, and several congressmen and multiple congressmen are saying this, and multiple lawmakers are making this point, and and even journalists and commentators, and we're just supposed to expect to believe this. And these officers who came up that was their intention. And so there was one officer, Officer Harry Dunn. He was he's a black guy, and he gave this whole talk about how the crowd surrounded him and began calling him the N-word. And in his testimony, he actually spelled out the word, because one of the rules in our society is that blacks can actually say this in a public setting. And he was even using other curse words too with it. And so were the other officers, which you rarely hear. They try to say expletive or not say these curse words in congressional testimony, but the power of the horror of January 6th required them to say the F word and the N word and to really set the tone for how serious this was and how awful it was. And he sat there, and I think this is one of the more ridiculous things about how they're trying to libel these people is that he sat around. He said that all these people said shouted. He had hundreds of people shouting the N word at him. And, all these guys had body cameras on them. And even if he didn't have a body camera on him, there had to be another officer who recorded this. And this clip would have been so damning that they would have been playing this on CNN all the time if this had actually occurred. And it has not occurred yet. And this is one of and the media has been desperate for these clips of just showing cops, dealing with evil Trump supporters from their body cameras. Why hasn't this been released yet? I mean, this would be like one of the more damning evidences that they have. And I don't actually necessarily believe it because, it's assuming that the ordinary Trump voter says that a lot in public and can get other people to say it with them, which even in our America today, even if those people may say that word privately, they know, pretty much everyone knows not to say it publicly. That's how strong of a taboo that is. And people are certainly not going to start chanting that. I think people are more, as I think it happened in the riot or the protest, is that people are more willing to fight police than they are to say the N-word in public. I mean, in some ways, most of the people who are fought police are facing many years in jail, but there is a greater social taboo around that, saying that word than committing a serious felony. So I don't necessarily believe it happened, but all the testimony with it is surrounded is like all these bad things. There was one officer who was condemning the religious beliefs of the people who were protesting, saying that they perceived themselves as Christians. They were white Christians coming there with Christian symbols, but is it really Christian to protest, at the nation's capital? I guess not, according to this officer. And Harry Dunn went on these remarks. And one thing about it, and there was, of course, Michael Fanone, who's like their favorite officer. He's got like neck tattoos. And he is always on TV, like wearing never wearing a suit or anything. He's on there. And every time he's on TV, he's like talking about how horrible the January 6th was. And even he went on CNN recently and he played this voicemail, which I don't even know why it's a voicemail. It's like, there's like, how dare someone send a nasty voicemail to Michael Fanone? And this whole thing is like, the guy basically called him a pussy, and he's like, why don't you show the same concern for Black Lives Matter riots that destroyed our cities? Which is true, they don't. They don't care about this. I only care about the Capitol. And like, we're sitting there in this clip, and you're probably like sitting there nodding along with the voicemail. It's like, this guy's he's a little aggressive. He's not being very polite, but he's making some good points. And you're supposed to sit there and be like, this is so terrible. Like, this is the most evil thing I've ever heard. And that's what most of the response is. And you also had all these, lawmakers. I mean, Adam Kinzinger went from laughing to crying within a minute when he gave his testimony about how awful it is and how it was a bad day for democracy. But we need to be, our democracy needs to remember its good days. And Liz Cheney got up there and said, we need a full purge of all these people. We need all these people called upon, meaning Trump and his associates and the Republican leadership. And this is a threat to our republic. Our republic can't survive unless we purge these people, as that's how our democratic system works, is that we purge and punish and arrest the members of the opposition party, which Liz Cheney is apparently a member of, but she doesn't care about. I guess she thinks she's going to be the leader of the new Republican Party that's allowed by the one-party Democratic state. So they're going on, and this is like a whole media spectacle. And anyone who's affected by it is just totally brainwashed by the propaganda. Now, going along with the future of this committee is one thing that the total intention of this committee is to create a spectacle and to smear the Republican Party and to possibly bring it down. Now, how far along they're going to go, that depends. Are they just going to have these they're interviewing random people and that they like, embarrasses Republicans because CNN and MSNBC cover it for a few days. Or they're actually going to call upon like Republican leaders and people associated with Trump, or even Trump himself, to testify before the hearing and to subpoena them and to get documents. That remains to be seen. That's clearly what they want. I mean, that's what Liz Cheney said in her speech at the testimony, or at the hearing, and that's what they want. Is that the whole point of this committee is to punish and to undermine the political opposition to the regime, and they're labeling them as terrorists, as domestic terrorists, and as a threat to the republic. And the only way the Republican can survive is if it purges these elements. That's the message of this hearing, and there's no other. This is why Republicans didn't want to go along with it. Now, how much for the power? It's like, I know if they had a full on, Senate approved January 6th commission, they would have more powers and it'd be a lengthier investigation. With the House Select Committee, I really just think it's going to be a media spectacle, but maybe they'll call some people to testify. And I mean, they can subpoena some of these people, but I don't think it's going to go to the extent that we saw with Russiagate, and the Mueller's investigation, where he's able to subpoena all these people and rack up the legal debts for anyone he targeted. I'm not sure that's going to happen here, because I'm not quite sure about the powers of it. But I mean, this is the point. And Democrats want to run on January 6th. This is their main focus right now, is continually relitigating January 6th, because January 6th, unlike other recent bad events in America, like, you could say like some of these mass shootings that have occurred that were committed by POC, or the rising crime wave that we're having that is leaving thousands of Americans dead, or the border crisis, or anything like that. None of that helps secure their power. And by continually pushing January 6th into the public discussion, they're able to justify their power grab. They're able to justify the federal government ordering big tech to do what they want. They're justified in, giving the power to these intelligence agencies to spy and persecute ordinary Americans, which they're now doing. I mean, the Capitol Police, for some reason, is the only police department that they all support. They wanted to fund every other police department, but they increased the funding for Capitol Police, and now they're turning it into a domestic spying agency for no reason at all. And they're going to even have greater powers than even some of the ordinary law enforcement. So this is what they want. They want a system that gives them more power and control, and January 6th supports that effort. And that's why we're going to continue to have the select committee. I mean, it's going to be their Benghazi committee, which, if you guys remember from the pre-Trump era in Obama's second term, the Republicans had a Benghazi committee to investigate Benghazi, and the whole point of it was to embarrass Democrats. I mean, they did do a decent job, because the Benghazi committee was responsible for learning about Hillary Clinton's missing emails, and that became a problem for her when she was running for president. And Democrats are hoping to do that again with Republicans in elections, where there's some damning piece of evidence that they find, or some thread that they find that they can use to attack Republicans and to persecute the political opposition. And yeah, it's pretty insane. I will probably continue to have this, but January 6th is going to continue to linger in our minds, and you're going to see what you're really going to be fascinating is how they compare January 6th to 9/11, because I mean, we're coming upon the 20th anniversary, and you're going to see so many articles comparing the two events and saying, now our real threat is what happened on January 6th. And the real threat is within. And this is why we need our domestic war on terrorism. This is why we need like a new Patriot Act to persecute citizens. And the only way they can accomplish this is by keeping January 6th fresh and alive in the minds of Americans. And this is what the Select Committee does. And a final thought on this is that I didn't get into this, but Officer Dunn is like the perfect representative for what the system's motivations and focuses and priorities are. is that this guy has had a very left-wing Twitter account for many, many years. He's criticized Tucker Carlson and Trump repeatedly from this account, and they keep uncovering these tweets of, that a lot of them are saying anti-white racist stuff. But one of the funniest tweets that they pulled up is him criticizing people who were attacking the destruction going on in the BLM riots of last summer, saying that it's just property damage. Does that matter? Does that more important than the lives being taken by police officers? This was his essential argument. And now this guy he's one of the few who didn't really cry, but he's giving this sad and serious, solemn and serious presentation on how awful it is that these protesters, charged into the Capitol. And the vast majority of them didn't cause any destruction. And the destruction and the damage to the Capitol is far, far less than the average riot caused to any city in America. I mean, it's far less damage. And there was even, and pretty much, none of the rioters or protesters didn't take any lives. All the lives that were lost that day were either protesters themselves or the one cop who died afterwards due to an unrelated injury or unrelated medical condition. And the only person who was killed was a cop killing Ashley Babbitt, a Trump supporter. So this is the notion, is that, Black Lives Matter riots are good because it helps support the system ideology. It helps reinforce the empire's power. But, people protesting and walking around the Capitol without permission is the greatest threat to our country since 9/11, and possibly even a greater danger to our country since 9/11, because it went at the heart of our democracy, or whatever argument they like to use. So this guy is a perfect example and perfect representative of the system and the empire, how it can have these conflicting notions in their head and they're perfectly okay to believe that BLM riots are good and property can be replaced, but entering the Capitol without permission, that can't be replaced. That is a sin that can never be blotted out. Now for the final topic, this is a lot about talking about conflicting narratives. Of course, it's with the changing narrative around vaccines and the hospitalization, and once again, they're trying to scare us into another lockdown, because they're always wanting to do this because they love exerting control and power, and this is really a test run for them, being able to shut us down and force us to do things that we don't want to do, under the pretext that we have a serious crisis at hand. And the only people resisting this crisis are evil, white, redneck Trump supporters who we need to punish. And they're doing this with January 6th, and they're continuing to do this with COVID. So they're once again warning about the Delta variant and how, there's all these hospital beds are being taken up. Even if they look at the data, hospital beds are not being taken up. And as I talked about earlier this week, there's an Alabama doctor and many other doctors are saying I'm happily telling these people are going to die, and they're begging for a vaccine. Too late, sorry. And there's no evidence of that in their hospitals they're working at. They're once again, creating a fear and panic among the American people so they get another lockdown. And even in this time, they're once again changing their story. The CDC and all these experts have been demanding that people get vaccines. And now they're telling people that people are vaccinated, they're super spreaders. They're actually more likely to spread. And this is their new narrative. And there's people who are very upset about this. It's like, wait a minute, you told us to get a vaccine and now you're saying we're super spreaders. I mean, Michael Rappaport, who's an actor, loudmouth actor, he's always anti-Trump, and he's really upset to the fact that he got a vaccine thinking he was doing the right thing, and now he's being told that he's a super spreader. He's very upset about that. And there's also other people. There's a lot of libs on Twitter who are very upset by the fact that they're told that by having a vaccine, they're now spreading the virus. And so we're now going in this, they're now going to have to mask up too. And all these people are pissed because most people don't like wearing masks outside of journalists and people who live in Washington, D.C. and New York City and the Bay Area. Most people don't like to wear masks, and now they're being told they're going to have to mask up again. So they're very upset about this, and they're using this control. But this is, once again, it's a real test for how they can control the American public through propaganda. it's a complete reversal of what they've been saying. They're saying if you get the vaccine, you'll never have it. Now they're saying, oh, your health effects won't be that bad if you have it. And there's continuing examples of people continuing to get the virus, even though they had the vaccine, as they're documented with them being super spreaders. It's like, a large part of that Democratic delegation who fled Texas that the media loves and worships as heroes, even though they're all weirdos and show a lot of how the people who are in state legislatures are the biggest mediocrities and idiots in America. All those people, even though they're vaccinated, they got the virus. And then there's a golfer who, ever since he got the vaccine in the spring, has had tested positive for the virus twice, and he's actually lost a significant amount of money due to being banned from, not being able to play in these golf tournaments. And this continues to happen. And then they're like, you have to get the vaccine. And then like, well, I got the vaccine, now I have it, and I'm told I can't do what I want to do because I'm continuing to get the virus, or you keep changing the rules around on me that I can't, create there's no clear path for me to operate in the society that you're creating. But they're continuing to do this. So Fauci comes out and has a new narrative. And like anytime Fauci comes out, there's like a completely different thing he's saying. And it is a test for how they can get the people to follow along. I think they'll get most of these people to follow along. I think there was a time on Reddit, somebody shared a thread on Reddit. And of course, I've talked about Reddit Americans. And these people were saying, "Oh, I'm happy with this. Bring it on! Like I'll take the week long of body aches and pains to watch my favorite TV show and eat ice cream." And the last man is shouting and crying, and he's excited for this new world that they're bringing about. And yeah, this is they really are testing with the propaganda whether it can work or not. Now, so I said that it may follow along, but I mean, people really like the fact that we've had at least 2 months of everyone not walking around with masks. And in a lot of other places outside the major urban areas, they've not had a mask at all for many, many months. And they've not had to worry about the social distancing. Everything's been opened up, especially if in a red state like, I don't know, South Carolina or Arkansas. You don't have to worry about that. But now, they're imposing these mask requirements. Even in Florida, they're saying indoor masking has to occur for everyone over the age of 2. CDC is now ordering rules that all kids in public schools must be masked at all times. And even the rules that they're stating for masks is that, like, even if you're at your own home, you have to mask because you might be around a kid. And even though the virus poses minimal risk to kids, you apparently have to mask up in your own home. And kids have to basically be masked up or interact with masked people at all times. Like, they cannot see a human face without a mask at any point in their lives, according to the CDC. And these rules keep changing. We're going to have when fall and winter starts, when flu season starts, there's going to be another panic. There's going to be other fear, and they're going to create other new rules, and they're going to have a completely different line on the vaccines. And this is just, people are getting jerked around, and people are getting tired of it, even liberal people. And even though I'm saying that most people will follow along, I do think there is a limit to this, and they are jerking people around and completely memory holing everything they've said, as they've done every single time with this virus. Like, they've changed their line on it and what we need to do. And I think there is some evidence that people are getting tired of jerking around. But whether it's enough to where they stop following these rules, we'll have to see. And it is, it is what it is with these, with the propaganda. And I've always said, like, one of the points I made out of, I think it was a few months ago, I think it was in May, about how they're talking about inflation, because inflation is now occurring. And this is going along with how they're propagandizing on COVID. Is that inflation is occurring. It's like a serious problem right now. And the administration is able to push the media to claim that inflation is actually good, or it's not a big deal, or it's only temporary, and people are already following along with it. And I made this point about inflation, is that when, we're going to have inflation, but the Biden administration is going to convince the media to say it's either no big deal or it's not happening. And a large percentage of the population is going to agree. And we're already seeing this, even though there's more people getting tired of getting jerked around and told like changing stories, and a lot of these things are getting lied about. There's still a significant part of the population that has no long-term memory and has no conception that the experts in charge, maybe not knowing what the fuck they're saying, and they'll follow along with it. And I think we're going to see this with their changing rules on the mask guidelines and the vaccine, is that the Reddit Americans are there to nod their heads and like, oh, sounds right to me. Give me another shot. I want another lockdown. More ice cream and TV, and they'll agree to it. And so it's very depressing, but I think, noticing propaganda, it really does deflate these notions that Americans have, that they're free-thinking individuals who come to these ideas on their own, and that they can resist tyranny because they've just got so much free speech and free thought. And no, they're not. Most people are cattle. They just, the government pushes them in the cattle pen and they just sit there and moo. And they're like, oh, moo, ice cream, moo, Netflix, moo. And they're happy in the cattle pen. And, the government can keep putting them in a different cattle pen, taking them out, pushing them back in, and they won't notice the difference because most people are cattle. They're herd animals. They don't really understand these issues. And it's a little, negative. I don't want to be too hard on people, but this does deflate a lot of the ideas about we're all special little individuals. We all can think for ourselves and we can all arrive at conclusions on our own. No, you can't. Most people are easily swayed by propaganda and they'll jump in whatever, and they'll happily move into whatever cattle pen the media and the government tell them to enter. So we're the people who are not wanting to get in the cattle pen. We are not cattle. And that's my final thought, my final white pill thought for my listeners, is that due to listening to Highly Respected, you're not getting in the cattle pen. You're not mooing. You're not wanting to live that life. You're able to look beyond the propaganda and actually think for yourself, thanks to my high IQ takes. So that's my final thoughts on that. I don't have any cognitive elite questions today because this is a podcast on short notice, but I will have some for next week if I record for next week. When the next episode will drop, it may be on Monday. I like to have the schedule on Monday, but due to this, podcast, recording that on that day, things may change, but so we'll have to see. And I maybe even take the week off. I don't know if I'll do that because my listeners depend on me. But we'll have to see. And of course, as a reminder, there was a new IQ supplement this week on Why Liberalism Failed, book by Patrick Deneen. Make sure to listen to that. It's very interesting. Of course, as all of my discussions are, it's very interesting. And we will definitely have another IQ supplement next week. So be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.